Well, welcome everyone. This is part one of the 2026 Sizzling Summer Series entitled Taking Care of Public Health, Building a Resilient Workforce, sponsored by the UNMC College of Public Health, Office of Public Health Practice in partnership with the Midwestern Public Health Training Center. My name is Jessica Chavez Thompson. I'm a public health practice coordinator at UNMC, and I'm joined by my teammate, Brandon Drust, and we are going to be your co-hosts. This year marks our 8th Sizzling Summer Series, and this year we're exploring what it means to take care of public health by building a resilient workforce where people feel supported, connected, and able to thrive. Our amazing guests will provide language, tools, and resources focusing on strengthening inclusion, belonging, and psychological safety, while also understanding and responding to the effects of sustained stress and traumatic exposure on individuals and teams. So that first part, the strengthening inclusion, belonging, and psychological safety, that brings us to our guests, Laura Brooks Dueland and Emily Adams, co-founders of Inclusion Analytics. Welcome, Laura and Emily. And before we learn a little bit more about them, we have a few housekeeping items. So as those of you who are familiar with webinars on Zoom, you know that everyone will remain muted and cameras off during the webinar. However, there are ways that you'll be able to engage with the speakers or with Brandon or me as needed. There is going to be a poll, which you will be able to access using a QR code that'll be shown on the screen. You will want to make sure that you have a mobile device like a smartphone or a tablet that you can hold up, scan the QR code, and participate in the poll as well. If you have any issues accessing that, feel free to just send us a chat with your response too. We'll make sure that gets to our panelists to help inform the conversation. And then, of course, if you've got any questions or comments or any other responses that you want to share, you can utilize the chat or the Q&A feature. And today's session, again, it's being recorded. This recording will be posted to the Office of Public Health Practice website. And finally, we invite you to be sure to evaluate your experience via a short survey. It's going to be provided in the chat at the end of this webinar, and will go out in follow-up emails as well. So enough from me. I'm going to turn it over to Laura and Emily from Inclusion Analytics.
Thank you, Jessica. Of course, I covered up my unmute button immediately, so that took me a second. But thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to start sharing my screen. I would love a thumbs up from the panelists that I am sharing indeed the correct screen. Okay, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Before we jump into content, I just want to share a little story. So a couple weekends ago, I was babysitting my sister's 3 kids. They're 10, 5, and 1. And it was pretty smooth sailing. We had a blast. We did crafts. We played in water, as we have to right now. And as someone without kids, I started picking up on when the biggest temper tantrums happened. So those were things like stopping the toddler from putting a rubber band in her mouth, asking the 10-year-old not to egg on the 5-year-old who was already winding up to hit her, and stopping them from taking on any bad ideas from their friends before they did it. I was simply trying to protect them. They were not having it. And this is kind of how I imagine you all might be feeling right now in public health. You're trying to make sure that the public is safe. You're making sure they know their health risks. You're communicating resources to help remediate things like lead. And you're developing policies to ensure everyone has equitable access to healthy living. And whether it's due to lack of trust from the media or someone's favorite influencer gave them a heads up on a new supplement that detoxifies lead, don't worry. The public doesn't always want to listen right now. Over that weekend, I found respite in my connection to my sister, my mom, and all of my friends who are incredible mothers who assured me that yes, I needed to take that rubber band away. And yes, that is the exact reaction that I could expect. They helped me feel sure-footed and like I was still moving in the right direction. So while you all are taking care of the public, who is taking care of you? Our goal today is to talk through some aspects of the workplace that can help build resilience by ensuring that we're taking care of each other. Before I dive into that, I just want to give you all a little background on who we are. If you weren't at the Nebraska Public Health Conference where we spoke, Emily and I are co-founders of Inclusion Analytics. We're based out of Omaha. We're both Nebraska natives. Emily grew up here in Omaha, and I grew up in rural Nebraska. And we met in our graduate program in industrial and organizational psychology, which is a field that applies psychological principles to understand and improve human behavior at the workplace. So in that program, Emily and I got the opportunity to work on a ton of group projects. We had many late night study sessions and splitting up of work to make sure we could make it through. And we even got to work on our massive dissertation project together. And as we were looking to our graduation day, we realized we had developed this product for our dissertations and we work really well together. So we decided to start Inclusion Analytics. Through Inclusion Analytics, we are data focused or people focused, but we rely on data. So we pair data with these psychological principles to identify the root causes of issues in workplaces and find solutions to help with workplace culture, employee engagement, and well-being, and hopefully enhance individual and organizational performance. Now, if you were at the public health conference, you will recognize some of the stories that I will be telling throughout here. So apologies for the repeat, but hopefully if you're listening in, your colleagues can enjoy the laughter that you now know when to cue up because you've heard these stories before. But today we're going to focus on building resilience in your workplace with the psychological principles of belonging, psychological safety, and fairness. These concepts help ensure that we feel valued and connected at work, have the freedom to speak up when we see an issue, and feel secure through equitable systems and outcomes. They're focused on how we come together as individuals to build that is something that's more powerful than ourselves. Now that you know a little bit about us, we would love to learn a little bit about you. We are all responsible for building culture. These psychological principles matter for every single person, and where you sit in your organization doesn't matter to contribute to these. However, you might be able to pull on different levers depending where you are in that organization. So we'd love to understand who's in the room based on where you sit in the organization. On my side of things, the QR code is up and it should be available for you all to take this poll. And that will give us an idea of who might be in the room. Hopefully, it'll start coming through here soon. There we go. Okay, we got the team lead, some folks in leadership, supervisors, managers. Awesome. We'll give it a little bit more time. So what I'm seeing right now is a lot of folks have some additional levers that they can pull here. We can focus on some systems rather than simply just focusing on our individual behaviors, though those have a massive impact as well. I'll let a few more trickle in. We're shifting pieces a little bit. Wonderful. Okay, so yeah, we have some managers leadership. We're kind of across the board. Okay, thank you all for participating. I'm going to keep on trucking along in our content. So through our work, we are all interconnected. We work interdisciplinary, we're interdependent, and we rely on collaborating. And that should be easy because we evolved to work together. Unlike other species that don't necessarily collaborate in the way we do, we survived this long because of living in groups. It's been key to our survival since the beginning, and our collaboration helps to keep us safe from outside threats. It reduces our chances of starvation, and it protects us from the elements. But working interdependently isn't always easy. We know that. And in order to get the benefits of living in groups, we have to trust each other. Trust that our group will have our back. Trust that they will do what they say they will do, and trust that they accept us even on our bad days. Because of this reliance on interdependent, we all are seeking belonging. It's argued that belonging is actually a universal and fundamental human need. So psychologists believe that because the sense of belonging has been tied to universally impact our mood. It's been shown to actually make an impact on our health, and it changes the way we cognitively process information. We have this need in our daily lives, whether we're in our social lives or we're in our workplaces. Before I dive into the effects of belonging and how to build it, I would love to hear from you. So we have a chat feature here, and using that feature, I would love for you to think of a place. This could be a place, this could be a group of people, but think of a place where you really feel like you belong. We're going to revisit this place. So if you could use that chat feature and throw into it where you feel like you really belong. Oh, I'm seeing some chats too about that piece. Hopefully they were able to. Awesome. Home, for sure. Great place. With the core team at work. That makes sense. Sometimes we feel maybe not necessarily that we belong in the larger group, but in that core team. Home and with family, the library. Oh, I love that. Library reading book nook. Okay, I see two libraries there. If you all don't know each other already, you should definitely be connecting. Orchestra community groups. I love that. Okay, now I'm going to ask for you to pull a Word doc up or a notes app, something on the side. You can even write it in. But if you're willing to, I'm hoping that you can take that information and copy and paste it into the chat later. What about this place, about these people, really impacts you? What are the feelings that you associate with it? What are the actions that people are taking that are helping to, oh, sorry, Beth, I see that you say you can't see the chat. I will connect the library folks later. I see two people talking about the library. That seems important. But what is it about the library? What are the actions that people are taking that contribute to this feeling? Emily had a really great example that sometimes it's the actions that people aren't taking that contribute to the feeling of belonging. So again, this is just reflection. You can go ahead and write that down to the side. But these actions help us think of ways that people can contribute to that. So now I specifically want to turn to the workplace. I've seen a couple of folks in the chat here say that their core team or their workplace, but I'm also seeing a lot of folks who are saying family, community events, people like this. Yes, Gabe, I can go back to that slide. I had a request to go back to this. If anyone wants to take a screenshot of this, these are great questions to reflect on throughout, for sure. Let me give it a couple more seconds. All right. As I mentioned, a lot of these things that we talked about are our family, our friends, our community events. We saw some pieces that are focused on the workplace, but I want to go specifically to that workplace. We've been talking about belonging in the workplace for quite a while now. We find that Peld and colleagues in 1999 defined workplace belonging as the extent to which someone is accepted and treated as an insider. Barak and colleagues suggested that this stems from the extent to which a team member feels included in the formal processes. These are things like access to information through systems like onboarding and orientation, and access to decision-making channels like pay transparency or clarity around your performance reviews. It also stems from the extent to which someone feels included or excluded from informal processes. So these are the day-to-day interactions you have with your team. What we used to call water cooler talk, which is less of a thing these days when we're on virtual teams, but still an opportunity for folks who are going into office. Maybe grabbing lunch with colleagues or having a chat. It's the extent to which your manager checks in on you and supports you, and the extent to which you feel like an insider and understand the cultural norms and the unwritten rules of the organization. Overall, people just really want to feel like they're a part of a team with the same goals and interests. In more recent research, we're starting to see what that impact of belonging has on organizations. And we see that organizations with a high sense of belonging see 50% lower turnover rates, 75% fewer sick days, and 56% higher job performance. We even have some data that tells us a little bit about how this impacts public health in particular. So in the most recent publications of the Public Health Wins data, which is a nationwide study that was conducted across 48 states with 1,100 health departments and 38,000 health professionals, many of you included on this call, we found some really interesting findings. And when I say we, I mean the researchers there, but I found it really interesting when I read the research. So what we found was that public health professionals are reporting burnout. That's probably not that interesting, right? 7 out of 10 individuals are indicating that they are feeling burnt out right now. And that comes with a whole host of negative organizational impacts. What was really interesting to me, though, was that 5 out of 6 professionals indicated that they feel like they belong. That's a really high proportion, and you don't always see that in other fields. That high sense of belonging looks like it might be a really great resiliency factor, too, because with it, folks were less likely to leave. They reported that they had stronger mental and emotional health. And so as that burnout was predicting that people would leave more and have some of those emotional burnout features, we were seeing that the higher belonging was actually proactively working against that. So you all are helping each other through this particularly difficult time. And while belonging improves our work outcomes, exclusion can be absolutely detrimental to our team cohesion because people start to engage in counterproductive work behavior. So not only does it feel terrible, but they start working against each other. And who excludes you in the workplace has been tied to different types of counterproductive work behaviors. So what I mean by counterproductive work behaviors, things like sitting on an email too long, or maybe not adding your input in a meeting that you know would be a good idea. And we find that exclusion from a supervisor might lead to someone to do things like focus on other things at work, like personal tasks, engage in things like gossiping, or use organizational property for unauthorized purposes. Whereas when coworkers are excluded from people who are on their team, they're more likely to tease each other, they use the silent treatment, or we see different types of relational conflict. So while belonging means that people come to work more and are more productive, exclusion doesn't just mean that they don't show up. it also means that they start harming each other. So now that we've gone over these impacts of belonging, I want to talk a little bit about how we can build it. When we try to ensure someone belongs, a lot of times we simply focus on including that person into our group, making sure they feel like they're one of us. And that is a piece of belonging. But when we go too far in that direction, we try to change people so that they fit in. This is called assimilation, and it leaves people feeling like they have to let go of a part of their identity so that they can be a piece of the group. In reality, true belonging is a balance that we call optimal distinctiveness. It's the fact that we all need to feel like we're part of a group and we need to be valued for our unique contributions. So if we lean too far into that feeling like we belong aspect, we run into losing our identity and falling into assimilation. If we go too far into distinctiveness, we no longer have the connections that tie us to our group and we feel like outsiders. We really need that balance of value of our uniqueness while feeling like we belong. And I'm going to have Emily jump in here because she has a great story that outlines how this can function.
Yeah, so hi everyone. A few years ago, I had an awesome opportunity to work with an office of people who were doing workforce development. It was an exciting time for me. I was still in graduate school and I was undergoing some pretty major personal transitions. I was so excited to learn from professionals in the field and to work on a federally funded grant. And it was just an awesome, incredibly supportive group of people. I was more or less an intern, so my job was to do whatever tasks the team came up with. And after I got my bearings in the office, I realized I had a lot in common with the people I was working with. It felt great, but like a lot in common. In our team of about 20 people, 19 of us were women. We were all between the ages of, early 30s to late 40s. We were all white. In the couple years that I worked there, we had multiple baby showers because many of us were having our first children, myself included. And professionally, almost all of us had a degree in psychology and actually multiple advanced degrees in psychology. So demographically, we were almost identical to each other. I might have thought that if there was anywhere in the world I should have felt like I belonged, it was this group of people because we were so, so similar. And certainly when we'd have lunch together or chat during our mini baby showers, we had plenty to talk about because we did have so much overlap in our lives. But when it came to our work, there was one key distinction that really stuck with me and made a difference. Our job was to support the workforce. And as an industrial organizational psychologist, I wanted to do that by making the workplace stronger, doing things to offer supports to leaders and managers, people who could influence policies and processes to support their team's unique situations. So in my mind, you support the individual by making the situation or the context really strong. The rest of my team were mental health practitioners, so their vision of supporting the workforce was a little more individual focused, providing individuals with additional support, continuing education, those resources to strengthen them as practitioners, to grow and invest in themselves, and therefore support the work by creating stronger contributors. No matter how many times I advocated for a yes and approach for doing both continuing education and organization development, my suggestions were met with polite decline. And I think it was because we were so similar in so many ways, it felt like it was this unique part of me, this unique perspective that I had to offer that really wasn't welcome. And work always felt a little flat because the one thing that to me stuck out about myself felt like it didn't quite fit in there.
Thank you, Emily. That's a really great example. So as you all might notice, this falls more on the assimilation side. Everyone was relying on that sameness, and really that value came from when you agreed with each other. Now imagine that a team member in this group has a salient marginalized identity. Maybe they're a person of color in this group that Emily was talking about. It might be really easy to fall into differentiation at that point, where everyone is coming to you for your unique perspective. Everyone is asking you about this specific identity of yourself. Really, again, as I mentioned, we want a balance of that. We do need these different pieces of us valued, but we need to make sure that we're also have that piece of sameness, that affinity that we can go to together. So our goal when we're building belonging is to build intentional connections so that we have that affinity. We know what those sameness aspects are, but we also know about those unique contributions that each person brings. So we can do this individually, or we can also build systems in place. We need all of it. Again, this is everyone's job. So one piece that we can build around belonging is to create space to get to know each other, to celebrate what matters to each other. Learn what type of food each other likes and suggest restaurants. Learn about each other's families and keep up with it. Now, please don't go prying into each other's personal lives, but when someone cares about something, they bring it up. And you can follow up on those things and ask about it later on. If you know someone is going through a hard time in life, check in on them. One thing that Emily and I do when I'm struggling is if I'm having a hard day, the first thing before anything is I ask her to tell me a funny story about her kids. Because one, there was most certainly a funny story from the night before. She has some young kids. And two, it brightens my day. And Emily loves talking about these stories. So it brightens her day too. It takes me from this grumpy mood into connecting with her and both of us starting off on a bright part. And that's because of our connection, not just because we said, hi, how are you today? So building on those connections can make a big difference in how you approach your day. Employees who report that they have a close friend or a mentor at work are 21% more likely to feel like they belong. And you can build those informally. But if you are a leader or you can ask your leaders for this support, it's a really great practice to build in an intentional mentoring program. This should include people in on those things like cultural norms and understanding how the workplace works. Who do you go to for specific questions? Who is the actual decision maker in the room? But it also gives people an opportunity to connect on some of those personal aspects. One of my favorite recommendations around belonging is to actually look at the physical structural cues that are in your building. You can design your space for natural collisions, opportunities for people to connect. So one study found that when a lunchroom sat 10 people instead of 4 people, their company's productivity increased by 10%. Another found that when coffee space was created where people actually wanted to gather and maybe even do some of their work, their productivity increased by 20%. And yes, this is because they get that opportunity to brighten each other's day, to connect on pieces that they may not know they have in common, but they're also bringing their work problems to each other. And they may not normally have access to someone in this other department who has a very clear solution to something they've been hitting their head against the wall about for weeks. So these few pieces can be really helpful in terms of building that belonging around your group. So again, I want to go back to our workplace. Go back to that space, not even your workplace. Go back to that space where you really feel like you belong. What were those feelings? Feel free to throw it in the chat. I will read it out. But what were those feelings? What were the actions that people provided? And were there any structures that existed that you noticed really impacted this? Give time for a little bit as people chime in. And as people are typing, Emily, do you want to jump on and talk a little bit about your place where you really feel like you belong? I think that that's an interesting example of the things that people are not doing.
Yeah, so I happy to admit very much an introvert. And so I find a lot of belonging in places where I can kind of be solitary. And interestingly, one of the places that I find a lot of comfort and belonging is at concerts. My husband and I have a shared love of music and have been to dozens of concerts together. And one of the things that I love is that there's this sense of kind of these shared norms of how you act and what's polite and what's courteous. And different types of music kind of have different types of norms that go with them. But as a collective, we kind of have this unspoken understanding of how to treat one another, how to take care of each other, give appropriate physical space, if it's not too packed of a show. But I like that I can be part of a group and also not have to engage with people particularly. But we can all have a shared love of music and enjoy ourselves and be together. But also for me, kind of a private and individual experience.
Yeah, I love that example because it shows those norms and the unwritten rules that people pick up on. Now, if you go to your first hardcore show or something like that, you might see that the rules are different and you might feel out of place. So sometimes it takes time in those spaces to understand them. Our workplaces are the same, where they have these norms, these rules that we don't know right away. And so having someone we can connect to right away and give us the clue of this is what you can expect in our meetings is really, really helpful. So we have some suggestions in the chat. Someone said that having an empath lens, a safe space and a brave space is where they really feel like they belong in their organizations. Acceptance, caring, familiarity is a really great example. Shared respect to contribute to this. We'll talk a little bit more about respect later on. It's a public space where everyone is welcome, and there are spaces where folks can hide out, as well as more collective spaces for folks to engage. It's a quiet space to think, reflect, and learn. I love that. A lot of times we think about just that connection and being together, but sometimes it's being able to be in a quiet space and have that space respected. A place that someone feels like they belong is we ask one fun, one personal, one individual question every week as a team, and we get to learn about each other and see similarities while also highlighting our differences. It's one of my favorite parts of the week. I love that. How many times do we go years and years working with someone and we have no idea that a huge part of their identity is that they bike every day or that they love to go to art shows? It's so easy to not know that. And if you do these types of things, it's really helpful. An icebreaker question. I love an icebreaker question. What is your favorite way to eat a potato? That is great. You can find out who loves French fries and wants to do a French fry challenge with you, or who doesn't even like French fries. And Jessica says fried every time. Yep, every time. I agree with that. We can go have a French fry challenge together, Jessica. All right. Thank you all for contributing. These are really, really great suggestions. I love the way we're talking about this. So I'm going to pause here. We've made it through kind of our belonging section, and I just wanted to check in with Brandon and Jessica to see if we have any questions so far. There will be more opportunity for questions going down the road if not, but I wanted to pause here for a little bit.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A, so
Okay.
unless we see any come through the chat, then I think we are probably good to continue. Oh, here's one that came through.
Awesome. So Brandon asked, do you have a suggestion on how to approach someone who practices the silent treatment to some management or other staff, ignores pleasantries, closed posturing, curt answers, negative features, again, only to certain people? Ooh, that is a really great question. So, in terms of those, sometimes norms can help a little bit with that, and we can speak norms into existence, whether that's at the start of a meeting or those types of things. But this might be something where this person needs to be checked in with. They need to understand what needs of theirs are not being met from other individuals that can talk through some of that restoration aspect, um, making sure that we are having those conversations of what is going on here. I'm noticing you're struggling in these types of spaces. Can you give me a little bit of background there so that we can help you feel more comfortable? Making sure we understand that person's needs as well. So that can get a little bit tricky. I'm happy to chat more about that with more information. Sometimes it's history, sometimes it's expectations, but I think that that is really, really important. Thank you. All right. So the next key concept that I want to move forward with is psychological safety. So we often think about psychological safety in terms of being nice. And if you're here in Nebraska, you've heard this before, but if you're not in Nebraska, here we are really good at being nice. In fact, we have a state motto that revolves around Nebraska nice. But just like Emily mentioned, it wasn't that her coworkers were being harsh to her ideas or telling her no. They weren't challenging them in any way. The thing that stung the most was that they were nice about them, but never took them on or really considered them. Psychological safety is not about just being nice. Psychological safety is the team level ability to face challenges head on, disagree with each other, bring up bold ideas without fear of negative repercussions. So let's go back to trust. Again, trust is the expectation that others' future actions will be favorable to one's interests. And as such, one is willing to be vulnerable to others and take interpersonal risk. So psychological safety takes that one step further to include mutual respect, vulnerability, and an opportunity for people to be safe to be themselves. And there's huge benefits to psychological safety at the group level. It's shown to increase knowledge sharing. So if I feel safe to throw out ideas, think about things, I'm also feeling safe to let you know information about the organization that you might not already know, or share information that I learned in a continuing education class that I took. It's been shown to improve our product development because people are throwing out creative ideas, and it's been shown to improve our performance. In fact, when Google wanted to know more about their top performing teams, they launched a 2-year study called Project Aristotle. It included 180 teams, and they were made up of all sorts of sizes, so from 3 team members to 50 team members. And the researchers looked at 250 team attributes. This included both team composition, so personality traits, identity characteristics, and team dynamics. They utilized a mixed method approach. So they conducted double-blind interviews and they looked back at historic data like employee engagement and work-life surveys. Their hypothesis was that the best teams would be composed of high performers, experienced managers, and unlimited resources. But what they found was that the highest performing teams had dependability, structure and clarity, and meaning and impact. And these characteristics, the relationship between those and their performance was moderated by psychological safety, in which teams felt safe to speak up, share ideas, ask questions, bring up concerns, and point out mistakes without being embarrassed. So that means that even if these characteristics were here, they were not contributing to a high team performance unless psychological safety was present. These team members needed to have a voice in order to contribute in these specific ways. And voice can show up in two different types of way. There's prohibitive voice, which shows up in places of perfection, and promotive voice, which shows up in places of innovation. Prohibitive voice is used when you're focused on preventing harm. When you're saying things like, hey, that dosage doesn't look quite right, or I noticed a typo in our budget around this grant. You're speaking up in order to stop mistakes, and you're prioritizing risk avoidance. In places of innovation, we want to ensure that we're throwing out as many ideas as we possibly can, even ideas that if they were followed through with might be mistakes. So promotive voice is used in these instances and is focused on improving the future and speaking up to suggest ideas. It sounds like maybe we could partner with this team in this other organization. Or what if we tried this? We use promotive voice when we're prioritizing growth and learning. Sometimes we think about this in terms of organizational culture. This type of organization needs prohibitive voice, and this type of organization needs promotive voice. But really, it's more complex than that, and we need both types of voices everywhere. However, there might be different settings in which we use those. So going into a meeting, it might be beneficial to the team if we specifically outline, this is a brainstorming meeting. We won't be making any decisions here, but we want as many ideas as we possibly can. Versus, we're finalizing this document in this meeting today, so we need everyone to be pointing out mistakes or coming up with ways to tie this up with a bow. We're not necessarily coming up with new ideas. Having that expectation going into the meeting can help people gear their brains towards where they can provide the most benefit. And we can structure these things in. For instance, if we take meetings, for example, we can build some formal processes within our meetings. For instance, some of us are quick processors. We can come up with ideas, we can respond in the moment. I'm seeing some folks get into the chat right away and others taking a little bit more time to edit their responses. Others need more time to think through ideas, take it from different angles. If you're really hoping to get everyone's input during the meeting, it's helpful to make sure that they have the information ahead of time, whether that's in an agenda, whether they have time to review the report before you ask them for their input. It not only helps slow processors prepare in a way that makes them comfortable to speak up, but honestly, it's probably helpful to fast processors as well to make sure that not only are we bringing up ideas in the moment, but we're also taking this from different angles as well. Another helpful practice is to do meeting check-ins at the beginning of the meeting. And this can be a really brief check-in. I've seen it be a thing where folks are understanding where everyone's at that day emotionally. But a practice that I've been doing lately and have really liked is quickly checking in with each person to see what they expect to get out of the meeting. Before you walk out of this meeting, what is the one thing you need to know or the one thing you need to talk about before we leave? I find that that makes sure that everyone is on the same page before we head out the door. And then finally, this may be overly obvious, but it's important to directly ask for people's input. Sometimes we have folks in a meeting that will take up a lot of space. I'm someone who feels uncomfortable with silence, so I'll start jumping in. Sometimes we need that pause to say, okay, Laura, you've talked enough. You can say it nicer than that, but you're good. We really like these ideas. I really want to hear from Emily. Have you had any thoughts on this? And directly asking for that input to make sure someone has an opportunity because they're not comfortable jumping in when they have that idea or jumping into the conversation to interrupt. We have all these benefits of psychological safety, all these benefits of voice, and yet we still often see silence. And that's because there are benefits to silence versus voice when you look at it from the speaker's perspective. Silence benefits oneself. If you stay silent, you're less likely to have negative attention drawn to you. And that benefit happens immediately, the moment that you stay silent. And it happens with pretty high certainty. Voice, on the other hand, even if it is asked directly, carries some risk. Has anyone been asked, how does this outfit look on me? Yeah, that's a direct voice request. But sometimes we don't know if we can be honest in that response. That can happen in organizations too, where people are specifically asking for your voice, but you don't know if you can be honest. Or you may be concerned about bringing up a bold idea and there's a delay in whether or not that benefit occurs. So you bring up this idea, it needs time to work through the system, so you don't see that benefit right away. And in the end, you aren't really sure if it's going to work. So the certainty of it is low. So even though we know there's all of these benefits to voices, in our own minds, sometimes we can get in the way of where is the benefit for speaking up. I also want to tell you a little bit about a time where voice was specifically requested and it didn't necessarily end well. So in my first job out of college, I joined this firm, and in a really early on meeting, we gathered to talk about the fearless workplace. So this is a system created by Amy Edmondson around psychological safety. And I didn't know anything about the system at the time, but apparently it started with an evaluation that the team had taken before I joined the organization. That evaluation focused on things like, is it safe to speak up? Are my ideas heard? Is there any ramifications for pointing out mistakes? And as I sat in this room, I noticed that my colleagues were acting different than what I had noticed before. And I was about to see a negative side of the organization that I hadn't experienced yet. That's because the COO was so mad. She was shocked that anyone could rate their organization as lower than a 9. She was really open to feedback. People could raise their concerns. They could come to her with anything. So she lectured us for about an hour on how the feedback that she had just received was wrong. And everyone quietly went back to their offices. Once I felt like it was safe, and honestly, I think she had left the building, I went over to my manager's office and asked what had just happened. And my manager just laughed. She said, yep, that's Susie. You want to make sure that you don't get on her bad side. We all just kind of navigate around her. And so I started to pay attention to how people did that. They would focus on positive compliments. They would give her comments about her great ideas or tell her her outfit looked great. But in the background, I started to be a part of these meetings where they discussed how they were going to tell her the bad news, or was there a way they could go around her about this information. When it came to the work itself, she didn't really know what was going on in the organization, because if you disagreed with her, if you presented an idea that didn't fit with her ideology, she got you out of that organization pretty quickly.
Okay, so I get to jump in again. And I've had the pleasure of hearing Laura tell this story to an in-person audience. And right now I'm really sad that I can't see your videos because when people hear this story for the first time, I get to watch jaws drop. People kind of turn to their friends and be like, what is happening, right? Is this really a real story? It is. And it's so effective because it is so clear and so obvious that what this leader was doing was counterproductive and particularly ironic in the face of a psychological safety evaluation, right? And so we can learn from this and all kind of laugh like, haha, that person's so, not self-aware. Spotting the bad is pretty easy, but sometimes it's a little bit harder to know what you should do instead. So we've got some tips for you. So psychological safety isn't created in a single moment. It is a group level experience that gets shaped over time through a bunch of different little interactions that either help or hurt people's collective experience of psychological safety. But if there's a moment where somebody chooses to use their voice, take that risk, and speak up, there should be a 3-step response to promote psychological safety with that person and anybody else who's witnessing the exchange. So the first step is appreciation. We need to thank them for their input genuinely, right? This person took a risk. They were willing to put it out there. And you now have information that you maybe wouldn't have been able to have had they not spoken up. So first, we thank them. The second step is to treat them with respect. This doesn't mean that what they said is right, that it's what you're ultimately going to do, but we need to be respectful of the person because, again, thinking about that silence versus voice calculation, they took a risk and they're willing to do that for the good of the team, for the good of everybody else. So we treat them with respect, even if we have good justification for not choosing their idea in the long run or going with the original plan. The final step is to voice a next step. Now, if somebody brings you really challenging criticism, you might need a minute, and it's okay for the next step to be something along the lines of, wow, that's really challenging the way that I am thinking about this right now. I think I need some time to sit on it. Can I come back to you tomorrow and revisit this after I've had a minute? Or if it's something that you're really excited about, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you look to the team and say, that sounds great to me. I'm so excited about this. I think I'm having a hard time critically thinking about it. What does everybody else think? I need the people's input to help make sure that this is the right direction that we should go. So 3-step response of appreciation, respect, and the next step helps build psychological safety in a moment where people were willing to speak up and voice either a concern or an idea. So we're going to again pause for questions. I didn't see anything coming through the Q&A, but I'll take a quick pause and see if anything comes through the chat.
Pause is good because sometimes folks take a little bit of time to type. So we can insert Jeopardy music here.
While people are maybe considering thoughts or questions, recognize we've got about 40 minutes left together, a little bit less. We're coming in on our last section of content to present, and there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. So if you're still noodling it over, still kind of formulating that thought, don't worry. We'll have another opportunity for questions at the end. Yeah, we had one comment come through that's truly startling when you see someone act in the manner that Laura was describing, and it really is. Kind of takes you back and you just wonder, like, is there a hidden camera here or something? Like, doesn't everybody understand that this is wrong? But hopefully today we're building a few skills and tools in our toolbox to help us be prepared for moments like those or to avoid them ourselves. Okay, so I saw one question come through that when psychological safety is damaged, what is a way to create repair? And kind of going back to something Laura said about norms, I think one of the strongest ways is if there is a culture of kind of direct conversation and mentioning things, one really strong way to call something out is to say, hey, we don't do that here. Or like in some way acknowledge what was inappropriate and say, I think what you're trying to get at is this, and like find the value in what was offered, kind of try to spin it and make it constructive, but be unapologetic about closing things off that really are inappropriate or harmful for the workplace. And then another question coming in on if you don't have power and you're trying to manage a challenging communicator, that's a really good question. And yeah, certainly power has a lot to do with our influence over situations. I would just encourage you that psychological safety is built up over time through interactions with everybody that we have, right? This is not a one and done opportunity. So if we can continue in our sphere of influence to encourage these good behaviors and support one another and build psychological safety and belonging, it strengthens everyone. But in terms of like directly addressing challenges in the moment, sometimes we have to ask for those people who do have a little bit more sway in the organization, either for their advice on how they've handled this in the past, or as a support in remedying situations if they continue to occur and you just don't have either the relational strength or the authority within the organization to really cut off this really challenging behaviors.
Emily, there is one more question in the chat. What if it's the organizational culture that is not psychologically safe? How do you operate in that realm?
Yeah. First of all, if that's a situation you're in, I'm so sorry. That is really hard every day to walk into an area where you're coming hoping to bring your skills and abilities and really contribute to the organization. But in so many ways, it feels like you can't fully. I think that is kind of a personal calculation on, are you able to do the work that you want to do? Are you able to still be effective and feel fulfilled in the work that you do in that environment? Or is it the best opportunity for you to leave? Sometimes we can do all that we want to try to, change a situation, and one individual acting is just not as strong as the collective whole. So I'd always say, take care of yourself first and foremost, but certainly supervisors, colleagues, if there are other people who kind of feel the same way, who are having similar reactions or responses to uncomfortable situations that those might be allies and people to brainstorm with for ways that you could subtly try to either shift the culture or work together to create some new norms and new ways of operating within your sphere of influence that can strengthen the overall culture. But it is a slow change. Culture change is not immediate, just like psychological safety isn't made or broken in a single moment. It is a slow burn that takes time and a lot of collective effort to influence.
Emily, I have a thought here. Is it okay if I jump in?
Yeah, please do.
So with psychological safety, as I mentioned earlier, it's a team level measure. So it's not one individual creates psychological safety, it is the team level. So that could be organization wide. But if you have a chance to start with a smaller team, to start setting those norms of expectations and actually using that language right away of, here's how we're going to build psychological safety. We're going to set expectations at the beginning of the meeting. I'm going to learn what your expectations are. Then you can start small with your team and then start building that out to say, hey, this is working really well. Can we try it in this meeting? And I found that that has helped in organizations where overall it's not great, but we can kind of start on a smaller scale and practice with each other until we start to grow it with other teams. That's all I have to add.
All right. Thank you, Laura. So we're going to flip to kind of our third area of content. And again, this is our final area of content. We'll have more time to chat at the end. But for our final section, we're going to talk about what organizational psychologists call organizational justice, Laura and I prefer the term organizational fairness because we think it's just a little bit more clear in the language that we actually use in real life rather than in research. So we're going to kind of set the stage for why fairness is so important to us. So it's helpful to consider that work is a social exchange between the individuals who work at the organization and the organization itself. And social exchange theory, at its most basic level, suggests that people are constantly evaluating their interactions with other people or with institutions for fairness. Now, I think they also kind of say that, like, in an ideal world, we're all pretty lazy and we would prefer to reap all of the benefits and do none of the work. But I'm willing to bet we've all lived long enough and worked and had enough relationships that we recognize it's a two-way street. We have to give in order to receive, and social exchange theory talks about balance. This idea of balance is no different in our personal relationships than it is at work. So at work, people bring their knowledge, skills, abilities, efforts, commitment, and positive attitudes to their job each day, right? These are the things that we as employees bring with us. And in exchange, organizations provide individuals with connection to meaning in their work. And sometimes that translates into their lives, a sense of purpose or meaning in their life through their work. Organizations provide supports to help individuals grow in their skills and complete their tasks. And then they also provide those really tangible benefits like financial compensation, healthcare, things like that. So when we feel like our effort as employees is relatively matched, it doesn't have to be perfect, but relatively matched with the value that we receive from our employers, we feel like things are a fair exchange. We probably don't even think about this exchange because it's fair, things are going well. But when we're working really hard on a project, we're putting in extra time, we're showing our commitment, we're using all of our hard-earned skills, and we feel like they're never recognized or put into use for the project, we start to feel a little uneasy about the balance of this exchange. And to further complicate things, most of us aren't strictly independent and individual contributors. Most of us work on teams within departments and organizations. And our teammates also contribute to both individuals and the organization by providing complementary skill sets, things we can't do ourselves, sharing the responsibilities of the work, because again, we can't fit everything into 40 hours a week, and then hopefully bringing their own sunny attitude to work, and then providing that all-important sense of camaraderie and belonging and affinity and connection that Laura talked about in the belonging section of this presentation. So again, when we have relative balance and all of these things, we don't even think about them. But sometimes something falls out of whack or a big change happens and it changes our calculation. So all of these ideas that we have kind of swirling around our head about expectations of balance or whether or not things are equal, we consider these psychological contracts. And psychological contracts are unique to individuals and they stem from these prior experiences of what a fair exchange should look like. They are built from things like organizational reputation and promises that were made to us along the hiring journey. Much like a social exchange, when things are going well, we feel pretty good. But sometimes a breach occurs, which is what we call a break in a psychological contract, and we see people respond in predictable ways. People are more likely to leave their jobs, or if they stay, they're probably a little bit less satisfied with their job, or they might even reduce how hard that they work. Now, in one of my jobs early in my career, I was so excited to have the job offer, but a little bit concerned that I was going to have to commute for this role. And so I asked, as part of kind of my negotiation process, like, hey, are there times where I would be able to just bring my laptop home with me the night before? I'm a data analyst. I can do most of my work independently. Is that something that I can count on? And the HR manager told me, yeah, absolutely. I also commute for this job. This was before COVID, before working from home was really commonplace. And he assured me, like, yes, that is absolutely, when you need it, you can do it. And I was like, thank goodness. Lived my whole life in Nebraska and I still hate driving in the snow. So I don't want this like hour and a half commute to turn into a 3-hour commute on a snowy day. And so I was excited. When I got into the organization, I realized that there were no structures set up to support that promise that was made to me. Nobody else really worked from home. What he said was technically true. Like, yeah, if you're a little bit sick and you check your email from home, that's great. But when I wanted to do it on a more regular basis or more regularly in wintertime when it was snowing, everyone kind of looked at me strange. And so that never really came to fruition. And I always felt like I took this job in part because I thought I would have this opportunity. And it felt like that promise to me had been broken. So hopefully I didn't fall into any of these negative behaviors that we'll touch on next. But when breaches occur, there are predictable impacts on teams. People start helping less and harming more. And the helping behaviors are called organizational citizenship behaviors. And they're things like cleaning out the coffee pot after you take the last cup or at the end of the day. Is this mission critical work? No. Is it probably in anybody's job duties or specific responsibilities? Also, no. But does delicious caffeine help us all do a better job and keep critters out of the office? Yes. We just kind of depend on the collective for these things to happen. And we need people to contribute these organizational citizenship behaviors. So when this trust or these promises or these expectations that we have in our minds are broken, we see people helping less. But not only do people help less, they start to harm more. They engage in anti-citizenship behaviors. Like when you get that email with the subject line, "Hey, quick question," you can answer it immediately and keep the project moving and keep things going, help your colleague out. Or you can miss it, sit on it for a week and slow things down if that project isn't moving in a direction that you like. So the impact of breaches or these breaks in these trust and these fairness perceptions that we have is similar to what Laura talked about when we feel excluded. We experience these negative things at work, we help less, and we hurt more. Over time, the effects of exclusion, having promises broken, expectations or perceptions of fairness unmet, they add up and they really impact individual functioning, team functioning, and the organization overall. One of the ways we like to talk about fairness is that there are 4 different types. And I think this really helps us understand that fairness isn't just a single moment. And it feels childish to talk about things being fair, right? Because how many times do we hear young kids be like, "That's not fair." But it's something that we never stop attuning to. The type of fairness we typically think about when we're talking about whether something is fair is distributive fairness. And that is the outcome of the situation. Was the reward for whatever process appropriately given? Was the most qualified person for the job hired? Was the person who was working all the extra hours the one who got the glory of sharing the final results or giving the presentation or recognized for their extra hard work? So distributive fairness is what we typically think about when we think about fairness. It's the outcome of the decision. But fairness is more than just an outcome. Laura's going to take us on another wild ride of a work story that actually happened to her less than a decade ago.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Yes, here I am with another wild ride. So when we were in grad school, we had the requirement that we had to get an internship to have a practicum project. So I was looking around for different internship opportunities, and I landed an interview with a firm that I had heard awesome things about. So I went to the interview. It was a small team interview with the folks that I was going to be working closest with if I got the job. And it started out pretty normal. We were talking about their day-to-day, talking about the types of projects that they work on. But within about 10 minutes of the conversation, one of the team members pointed to my engagement ring and asked if I was getting married. I said yes, and the conversation immediately pivoted. She wanted to know all about the details. She was hoping that she would get engaged soon as well. Her and her partner had been talking about it, so she wanted to know the details of the wedding, what we were planning, and I wanted to steer the conversation back to work, but Nebraska nice here, I didn't want to be rude. I also thought that maybe if I connected with her on this thing, it would help my chances due to affinity. I just couldn't figure out how to steer it back. So about a week later, I got the call that, in fact, I did not get the job. And even though I had a little bit of an inkling as to why, I asked for some feedback. And the feedback I received was that the office needed more testosterone. And I kind of paused before I responded. I wasn't sure how that I could change that. It was out of my control. And so I just kind of moved on. A couple weeks later, I found out who they hired. They had hired someone else from our program, and he was a few years ahead of me in the program. He had a really great reputation. People loved being his teammate. He had further coursework than I had had. So it seemed like that was a really great person to hire. That outcome really seemed fair. And yet I still kind of felt weird about it. And obviously I still feel weird about it because I'm still talking about it today. So even though I felt like that was fair, I thought he was a great hire. It seemed kind of strange to me.
Yeah, and I will second that. It is a little bit of a strange process to walk into a job interview and be asked about your personal life, right? So even though with time, like you can acknowledge like a more qualified person is the right hire, something still feels off about that story. And I think this is a good story to illustrate that fairness isn't just an outcome, right? Laura's not upset that she didn't get the job. Perhaps there were other jobs since then that she's applied for and didn't get. But that's not the story that's in this presentation because there was probably a more normal process. So before we dig back into the other types of fairness, what's incredible about them and why we like talking about them so much is that even when we don't get the outcome or the reward that we want at the end, when distributive fairness does not fall in our favor, if we've experienced the other three types of fairness during the process, we're more willing to accept the outcome. People are less upset that they didn't get the outcome that they wanted if they feel like they experience these other types of fairness. So let's dig into them. So procedural fairness is the process for making the decision being fair and transparent. Was the process along the way the same for everybody who was going up for the reward? So again, we know the other candidate in Laura's story, he wasn't engaged or married at the time, so he probably didn't have a ring. He probably didn't get asked the same set of questions. And so that process was probably very different for them. When we feel like we have a fair chance at things, like I can recognize I'm not always the most qualified, the most appropriate choice, but if I feel like I had a fair shot and I got to give it my all, I still can feel good about what I was able to contribute in the process. The next type of fairness is interactional fairness, and that is the treatment that you receive during the decision making. Now, in Laura's story, nobody was rude to her. Nobody was berating her for not being good enough or smart enough or being less than the other candidates. But the interactions were still a little bit off, right? You don't go to a job interview expecting to be asked about your personal life. The questions were inappropriate for the setting that she was in. And that kind of leaves us with that ick feeling about what she went through. It just seemed off. So when we can treat people fairly and have good interpersonal, appropriate interactions during a process, people feel better about the result of the process, regardless of what it was. And finally, informational fairness is the idea that information about the decision is clear and available to everyone. Now, did that office really need more testosterone? Maybe. But again, knowing the guy that they hired, it was probably because he had a stronger work history. He had more advanced coursework. There were a lot of good reasons to hire him. but the information that was shared with Laura probably wasn't an accurate accounting of their decision making. And it just, again, kind of leaves us with that gnawing feeling that something wasn't right about the situation, even if we can look at it from a high level and acknowledge that the outcome was reasonable. So again, with these 4 types of fairness, we can look at our processes at work and evaluate, are they all built in? Are we ensuring that these things are happening? Because we want to manage people's expectations. We don't want to create psychological contract breaches where people feel disappointed or they feel like there's an imbalance between the effort that they're putting in and the rewards that they're receiving, even though we know that people can't always get the raise that they ask for. They can't always get the promotion. But if we can engage procedural, interactional, and informational fairness in our processes, employees will feel more supported and better about the decision, the distributive element of it, even if it doesn't fall in their favor. So as we begin to wrap up our prepared content and move back into questions, this is your cue to get them ready. Let's circle back to where we started with belonging. Belonging and fairness are deeply intertwined, and research has shown that they reciprocally cause each other. So when employees feel that they belong, they interpret organizational actions as fair and well-intentioned. So belonging signals to fairness. When employees perceive that they're being treated fairly, it signals that they're valued and it strengthens their sense of belonging. So what this tells us is that it doesn't matter where we start in our organizations, whether it be enhancing belonging, building psychological safety, or in enacting these fairness processes, there are action steps that we can take at every level of our organization and any level of our processes to increase trust among our workforce and create a healthier work environment. So for our final takeaways, building a resilient and inclusive workforce is everybody's job. It's about building trust, and we hope that you've learned tips that you can use to help build belonging and psychological safety among your team, your colleagues, those people you interact with every day, even if there's a lot of work to do to bring that to your organization. And if you are in a position of authority or you have influence over systems and processes, we hope that thinking about these 4 types of fairness can help you revisit those processes with a new perspective. And working toward building these psychological constructs really helps bolster people against challenging times. It helps reduce turnover and it increases employee satisfaction. So here's how to contact us. And if you are wondering where your organization is in relation to these concepts, we offer culture surveys that measure belonging, psychological safety, and fairness. But we also recognize that many of you are working in smaller offices and surveys may not make sense. We've worked with teams as small as 6 all the way to international technology companies and kind of every industry in between. So please reach out if you're interested in understanding ways that you can strengthen your workforce. We also know that some of you may have recently gotten back PH Wins data, and we'd be happy to help interpret those results and design some action steps that can really work on building belonging, psychological safety, and fairness within your organization if you think that that's something that would be helpful. As IO psychologists, we offer a whole host of data-driven and people-centered services, so feel free to use the QR code to check out our website or send us an email and let's find a time to either in person or virtually grab coffee. We would love to chat and hear about what's going on at your organizations and the ideas and challenges that you are facing. Right. So hopefully we've had a minute to set up for questions. And Laura, I'll invite you to join me back and we can see if there are any questions we can wrap up before the webinar is over.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with Colleen had a question in here of sometimes psychological safety becomes confused with the expectation of emotional comfort, niceness, or absence of tension. How can organizations show up when this happens? I love this question. I often talk about the difference between task conflict and relationship conflict. So we actually want task conflict in our organization. That's that challenging of ideas, making things better, improving them. It's when it flows into relationship conflict that it becomes the issue. So if you're able to keep comments focused on the task, focused on the content, that can help a little bit from it moving into the emotional aspect. Emily and I also have somewhat of a shortcut to make sure that we ourselves don't allow that task conflict to get into relational conflict. And that shortcut is we blame hanger. So if we know that we are about to dig into a report draft that I just wrote and Emily has a bunch of feedback for me, I always eat first. Because when I'm hungry, I hear that content feedback as personal feedback. And if we're able to talk about that, then we can think about other ways that we start to feel like task conflict becomes relational conflict for us personally. And we can say, you know, right now is not the best time for me to go through this. I'm starting to feel this personally. I need to take a moment and then come back at it while we're focusing on the task itself. And I think hanger is a really safe way to talk about that, but there's all sorts of other things that put that lens up that make us feel like the task conversation is getting geared towards us. And I think I saw Emily just come off mute. So do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add that often in psychologically safe environments, we do see more conflict, right? People are more willing to bring up ideas and challenge things and really, really go head to head to battle ideas. And that's a healthy sign, right? We want that healthy conflict. It's when it gets personal and people start those undercutting or those harming behaviors that we covered, that we start to see problems arise. So it's a little bit ironic that when we have psychological safe environments, we do see a little bit more conflict occurring, but typically it's constructive conflict and people can recognize that we are doing this to better our product, to have a better deliverable, to better serve our community.
Yeah. I think that that is super, super helpful in terms of how do you approach this and saying it aloud. We value conflict. We like our conflict to stay specific to this and reminding people again to come back to that. We're focusing on the task here, diffusing it when it seems to veer away from that. Oh yes, I don't know if we got to this question earlier. I'm having a harder time managing the chat than normal. So what if you don't have power and are trying to manage a challenging communicator? So yes, that is something that happens a lot where you're managing up or you're trying to figure out how to navigate these different pieces. Sometimes understanding personality differences. I know a lot of organizations will take the DISC or different things, and understanding how that person communicates can help you start to navigate the way they want information provided to them, and can also help you refocus them in a way that can help them provide information to you as well. I think that this can become a really hard balance in terms of making sure that you're not running into trying to work around someone, but still trying to communicate directly with them while meeting both of your needs. Emily, do you have any suggestions for that while working with a challenging communicator on a regular basis?
Yeah,
I'm just kidding. I don't think I am.
No, I think you did a great job on that one. Nothing really to add. And I recognize that we are just a few minutes before the end, so I'm not seeing a lot more questions coming in. And I know that the UNMC team has a few things to close this up with.
Hello, I was busy answering away in the chat. There was a very good, there's a couple questions, great housekeeping related questions. But first, I'm going to take a moment and say thank you so much to both of you, Laura and Emily, for coming on and giving us a taste of the amazing work that you guys offer and the insights that you provide. Also, huge thank you to our participants for this amazing engagement. This is such a big and important, it's like the meat of working with people, right? So this is wonderful for you all to come in and share information. Brandon put the evaluation in the chat. I am going to get to people's questions, but two things. Evaluation link is coming in the chat. Registration for part 2 with a different speaker. Same umbrella of discussion, feeling a sense of safety, resiliency within your with working in public health. But that is live now, the registration link. Okay, so there were a couple questions regarding the evaluation for this webinar. I'm going to double check, but I believe I don't know, and I'm going to look to see in there too, in the chat, if you click, I think that is supposed to be, it's not connected to you as a participant. And otherwise, if it asks for your name, can you get maybe if you're able, you don't have to enter your name. You definitely do not have to enter your name. Understandable too. I'm not sure why it asks for the name, but you don't necessarily need to put your name if you don't want to. Or you can make up a name. And then we also had the link comes able to watch this again. Ooh, in a team lead meeting. Yes. So hopefully by the end of today, we will get this recording up onto the landing page for Sizzling Summer Series, the OPHP website. And there's an email that will follow this webinar within the next day. Whether you attended it or not, every registrant will get it, and there will be information about how to find the recording here. So yes, you will get that. We may even have some resources, including potentially a PDF of some slides from Laura and Emily too, that we'll be able to share afterward as well. Oh, I don't know that I breathed during that. But yes, okay, I think that's everything. Any final words from our presenters? Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for joining us, and thank you so much for the great questions and engagement in the chat. I hope that we eventually got to a place where people could chat to everyone. So,
yes, we did.
Okay,
yes.
Awesome. I was trying to look at both and split my attention a little bit too much there. So that was awesome. So thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for attending.
Yes. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. See you on August 19th for part 2.